Hi, everyone. Thanks for jumping on early. I'll just give it another 20 seconds. We've still got people jumping on. There's a chat box there for those who are attending live this morning. Thank you. There's a chat box there. Introduce yourself if you're comfortable doing that, particularly service providers. And there's polls that will drop throughout. So I'll just give it another 10 seconds. I can see we've got lots of people online and we'll get going now. So thank you everyone for joining this webinar today. The next in our series, 7 ways to take back control of your separation. And in true live circumstances, my neighbours have just decided to have a team of builders drive down their drive, which is directly next to my home office, and they've just started their power tools. So if I'm a little red on the neck, it's because I'm a little bit nervous about if you can hear me or not and the concerns about that noise. So hopefully, please let me know in the chat box if it becomes overbearing, but that's why I'm a little bit nervous, okay? Who's this webinar suitable for? So we're going to have lots of people watch this back on platforms such as YouTube, mainly people who have separated. So the webinar is suitable for people who've recently separated. If your separation is amicable or high conflict, it will be suitable for you. And if you're trying to resolve property or parenting matters, again, it will be suitable for you. I can see in the chat box, we've also got service providers with us. So people from, for example, Relationships Australia and family consultants. Also relevant for you guys because you work frequently with the same clients as we do. So hopefully you all get some tips out of this as well. If you've got any good services that you offer and you think complement what I'm talking about, drop them in the chat box as we are talking. So just my contact details there. And I particularly like this next slide. I promise not, I swear that I will not use legal jargon in this webinar. If I do, please pull me up, let me know, and I will retract. Is that a legal word? Have I already failed? I will redact any legal jargon. Alrighty, what we're going to cover today, 7 ways to take back control of your separation. We will talk through these 7 things, and I reckon I'll go for about 45 minutes, so hang in there. There'll be the handout of these slides will drop through at the end. There's polls throughout to try and keep you interested and chat to each other in the chat box. The first thing, understand that your matter is unique. Every family law separation is unique. I'll give you some practical tips on things that you can do. We'll talk about ways that you can get organised, arming yourself with knowledge, the importance of wearing your business hat, the importance of understanding grief and loss in the context of family law separation. And of course, I'm going to recommend that you get legal advice. I'm a lawyer, of course I'm going to. There'll be a bonus tip at the end and an offer at the end as well. So please do stick around. And as I mentioned, I'm largely talking to those of you who have separated. So when I do talk, I'm going to use phrases such as your ex, your matter, and so on. So just be mindful of that if you are a service provider. I'm talking about our clients, our mutual clients. And also general caveat, which I put at the start of all webinars. This is general information only and not specific legal advice. Where do we start? Well, I think we start here. Nobody goes into a relationship planning to break up. And it might sound pretty straightforward, but it's actually really important to remember that. Nobody expects to be in this position, and most people don't actually, they don't know where to start. So I think always put that at the forefront of your mind, that you're not alone. And in Australia, people plan their wedding for months, if not years, particularly during COVID time when you're constantly rescheduling. But people plan that for months, if not years. And the average cost of a wedding in Australia is $36,000. Separation and divorce can cost more. And generally speaking, people aren't planning for it. Nobody expected to be in this position. And it can cost more from a financial perspective, but also the emotional toll that it can take on you when you're separated. just remember, I'll say this at the outset, it's just a bit of an introduction, but you're not alone. And the Australian Bureau of Statistics back in, and I'm not going to drop too many stats, don't worry, but back in 2019, there was 114,000 marriages registered in Australia. There were 49,000 divorce orders granted. Like, the stats are huge. You're not alone, but that in itself doesn't necessarily make it easier. What this webinar is about is 7 ways to take back control of your separation. And the key word there is control, because at the moment you might feel like everything is out of control, but there are things that you can control, and you need to control what you can control. You're not going to be able to control everything. That goes without saying, and particularly if you've got a difficult ex-partner, you're not going to have control over their conduct and their behaviour, but there are certain things that you can do, rest assured, that can help you get through this process. The more control you've got, the more likely you are to make better decisions, which in turn is also likely to save you money and emotional toil. And there's practical things that you can do to help make you feel more in control. First and foremost, one of the things that I'd recommend that you do is really understand and appreciate, and I particularly appreciate this slide. I do use it in a lot of my webinars actually, because it is so on point, and that is that your matter is unique. Every single person going through a separation has their own family law story, and the dynamics of each and every family is different. Each family is different. You know, the length of a relationship is different, whether or not you've got children, whether there's family violence, are there complex property matters, for example. There might be complex trusts. You might be married, you might be de facto, but every single situation is unique. Your circumstances are unique. And we'll go into a little bit later about not to be fooled by myths. And, you know, there's a lot of myths out there in the community and in the public at the moment. There always have been myths around family law, but there's a lot of myths around things such as, you know, there's always a 50-50 division of assets, or there's always an equalisation of super, no matter what the circumstances of your relationship. And a massive big one, which the people watching from Contact Services and Relationships Australia and so on will come across all the time, I bet you do, please let me know, is equal shared parental responsibility and equal time, and the lack of, or the misunderstanding, I should say, about that. So clients coming in and presuming that there should be equal time. So they're really common myths that we come across, and it's really important that you're mindful that your matter is unique. And just because Joe Blogs next door, noisy Joe Blogs next door, has a particular set of circumstances and outcome for their matter, doesn't mean that yours is going to be the same. And what I would suggest is this next tip, and which is this: lean on your friends and your family for emotional support, but not for legal advice, because it can end up costing you thousands. And everyone these days, everyone has their own family law story and their own experience. There's no shortage of advice, you know, from your hairdresser to your shopkeeper and your barista, not your barrister, your barista. I couldn't find any good pictures of a barista, but I do like this one of the hairdresser. But everyone's well-meaning. Most people are well-meaning, but it's not necessarily going to be right for you. So just remember, your matter is unique. So let's delve into another tip around how to take back control of your family law matter. Immediate practical tips that you can take. Number one, take copies of documents. So if you're fortunate enough to be able to take documents before you leave, if you're leaving the property, then do so. And gather your personal documents. So the sort of personal documents you want to collect and make copies of and retain originals if you can are things like your birth certificate, your passport, your ATO documents, super statements, bank statements, and so on, and store them safely. The documents that you want to copy of your ex-partner, if you can and if it's safe to do so, same sort of documents, so PAYGs, ATO statements, super statements, mortgage statements, and bank statements, and so on. If you're able to take copies of documents, whether your relationship is amicable or high conflict, that will probably really be helpful for you at a later date. Kind of leads into the next point, which is to familiarise yourself with the finances. And this can be particularly difficult where we see someone come into our office perhaps who has not been in charge of the finances of the relationship, and they don't really know what's going on or how bills are paid, or there might be complex shares and so on. Familiarise yourself with your finances as much as you can. So the sort of things you want to do is, again, take copies of those documents. If there's accounting documents, take copies of those. I recommend clients actually go into the bank and have that face-to-face conversation to really get an understanding with the structure of your bank accounts, your obligations, how they're set up. You might find that there's bank accounts that are set up in joint names that you weren't aware of, for example. So I really recommend that you do that in the first instance, and it's something that you can do without a lawyer. Next thing to do is to change your passwords and your PIN numbers. We all use well, I probably shouldn't disclose this. We use passwords that are familiar to us, and there's a good chance your ex-partner will know your password or can guess it. So things like emails, Apple ID, social media accounts, and bank accounts, get onto those, update your passwords, change your PINs, and do that as soon as possible. And speaking of the next slide, joint bank accounts, I mentioned going into the bank and highly recommending going into the bank for a face-to-face consult. Check if there are joint bank accounts and whether they can be drawn on. So that includes mortgage redraw. So if there are joint bank accounts, it essentially means that either you or your ex-partner can go into the bank or online and take some of those funds. So if you're concerned that your ex-partner might do that, what I recommend fairly early on is that you go into the bank and ensure that there's a joint signatory requirement. And what that essentially means is that funds can't be drawn from that account without both of you consenting to it. So that's something that, if you've got those immediate concerns, that's something that you should take serious consideration or give serious consideration to. On the flip side, if you're not the main breadwinner of the relationship, for example, and you might not have access to a lot of funds and you need to leave the property and set yourself up in a rental, for example, that can be really expensive. So if there are bank accounts that you can access, then that's something that you should consider as soon as possible before, for example, your ex-partner puts essentially a block on that. And it's not to say that you can't have access to funds later in part of your property settlement, but once a joint signatory is in place, it can be harder to get access to those funds. The other thing to consider is whether or not you need a caveat. So a caveat basically is lodged on a title and it prevents the owner of the property from selling or transferring property. So the circumstances where it may be useful for you is where you have a genuine concern that your ex-partner owns property in their sole name and they're going to sell it or transfer it to someone else without your knowledge or consent, or sell it cheaper to someone else, for example, sell it, use the proceeds of sale in a way that you don't agree with. So that's in circumstances where the title's in their sole name, and I'd recommend you'll need legal advice to get that and to prepare the caveat and so on, but definitely something you should turn your mind to if there is that genuine concern. Kind of goes into one of the myths, though, about separation, and the myth that this is a common one: if I leave the property and go live somewhere else, I leave behind my interest in that house. In other words, I can no longer make a claim, if I put it that way, over the house. That's a myth, and that's not incorrect. So even if you do leave, you still are able to pursue your interest in that property. So next slide, immediate tips. Update your will and estate documents. Keep in mind that separation in itself doesn't give you the protection that you need. So just because you've separated doesn't mean that your ex-partner no longer has rights as a beneficiary and or an executor of your estate if you die. And that's probably the last thing that you want, okay? So these are simple things that you can get done straight away to make you feel more in control. Update your will and estate documents to ensure your ex is not included. Update your superannuation, so your nominated beneficiary. You can contact the super trustee, the super company, check who your nominated beneficiary is, because there's a good chance you don't know. There's a good chance you did it years ago and you've forgotten about it. There's also a good chance that you don't want your ex-partner as your beneficiary. So get on to doing that. It's usually as easy as a telephone call, and you don't need a lawyer to do that either. While you're turning your mind to that, also think about any life insurances or binding death nominations that you've got and change them as well. Okay, super important that you do that as soon as possible. So when we go into the next tip around practical things, I guess, that you can do when you separate to take more control, my next tip is, it sounds very simple, but it's so powerful, and that is to be organised. Okay, so I've put there on the slide record keeping and chronologies, but being organised will give you a much better sense of control. And even if your relationship separation is quite amicable, it really is going to help to start keeping good records of everything. And don't be that client who comes into our office with the Woolworths bag and they're pulling out bits and pieces of paper everywhere and a notebook here and notebook there. It's really unhelpful for us, but also for you. And even if you're self-rep, having everything organised, it's going to just really make you feel as though you're much more in control. Get a separate notebook to do with everything separation. Anytime you speak to a service provider, a counsellor, Relationships Australia, a mediation service, a lawyer, legal aid, whoever it is, keep written notes of that, keep it all together. Keep it in chronological order. So, you want your date, your time, and the name of the person is always helpful, I find, phone numbers and so on. And the other thing that you can keep together in your notes, if it's a parenting matter, if you're not sure how contentious the parenting agreement's going to be, and you're a bit concerned that you might not be able to reach an agreement about the living and time spending arrangements for the kids, what I recommend is you also keep very detailed notes around, little Johnny went to mum's that weekend and this time to that time, or there were phone calls on these dates. And if there's any issues or concerns at handover, aggressiveness at handover, write that down. Late for handover, if it's a consistent concern, write it down. Keep all those notes together, obviously away from children, because if you ever need it, it's very good to refer back to, and you're not going to remember, well, I wouldn't remember in 6 months' time what happened 6 months ago at one particular handover, unless it was a significant event. With property matters, in terms of keeping everything organised, start getting together all your financial documents, because one of the requirements for property settlements is what we call discovery, or like exchange of documents. And even if it's an amicable separation and you've reached an agreement about your property division, to formalise that through the court by agreement, by consent, you're still going to have to exchange those financial documents. And if you've kept it all together, It's going to make it much easier for you down the track. So I really like this next slide, and I'm not sure maybe if I'm showing my age. It doesn't matter how you keep records, just keep them. I suspect you're not using a typewriter, but make sure you keep them. Other tips around, is everyone still there? I'm just checking the chat box. Just let me know if you're still there. I'm not talking to myself. Hopefully not. I do that a little bit, but thanks, Adam. Sounds like a roll call here. Yep, still here. Good. So in terms of getting organised, other tips that I recommend is update your contact details. Create a new email address. And what I suggest you do is that you use this email address for the sole purpose of everything separation, everything family law. So whenever you're, I don't know, you might be dealing with the refinancing for the bank, you might be dealing with lawyers, you might be communicating with your ex about handover, for example. Set up that new communication channel for all things family law. And I think that's particularly good if you're finding the process stressful and if you feel a bit anxious each time you hear from a lawyer or your ex-partner. It can be a good idea to keep it all together and to keep everything organised. And that flows on to my next tip, which is about batching tasks. And if you're feeling a sense of stress or overwhelm, batching tasks and sort of, I guess you call it compartmentalizing, can be a really helpful way to help get through that. So we have clients, and I've had clients tell me directly before, no offense, but I hate receiving your emails, and you can't take offense to that because I guess it's triggering them, but it's not uncommon for, and the lawyers listening will know, we've got our team of lawyers are in the chat today as well, but we know that sometimes it's hard to get hold of clients. They don't answer emails and don't take phone calls, and they struggle to meet deadlines. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes it's this sense of overwhelm. But if you can batch your tasks and put aside time to deal with everything with respect to your separation, group all those tasks, put aside time in the diary and deal with it, then that's really going to help you whether you're self-represented or if you have a lawyer. Either way, that's just, I think, a good way to deal with it. It's something I spoke about in my first book, Separate Ways. And the reason that I wrote this, so this book is, and I'm not plugging it, I'm just explaining. This book I wrote because there was a real gap in the market for people who've separated and realizing the grief and loss that you're going through in that process in the context of separation. So I wrote it through my own personal grief when my parents died. But one of the things I found was trying to keep up with everything in the medical system and deal with my parents' financials and everything, death related, probate related, estate related, medical related, you name it. And bills would pile up and stuff would pile up. My way of dealing with that was to, I guess, compartmentalize and batch it. So I'd say, okay, every second Thursday, I'm going to set aside 2 hours and just do it if I'm in the right mindset. So I'd recommend that if you can. Well, I've just, I thought I had technical difficulties, but I'm right. Next tip, arm yourself with knowledge. So this is number 4 of the 7 ways to take back control of your separation, is to arm yourself with knowledge. And what this means really is get a basic overview of what the law says. Understand that the processes are quite different for divorce, property, and parenting. And they're all, understand the differences between those, understand what's relevant to you. If you're de facto, then understand again that there's differences for you, and get that understanding of the overview of the law. You don't need to get into the nitty gritty, but just get an overview of that. And know your time limits, and this is really relevant for people who have separated. So a lot of people don't realise that if you're married, you've got 12 months from the date of separation to apply, when you can apply for a divorce, but you don't have to apply for a divorce. But one of the common myths is that people think they have to wait for the divorce order to start their property settlement, but you don't. You can start your property straight away. And so just understand your time limits. Understand that from de facto, you've got 2 years from the date of separation to resolve your property settlement. If you don't, then you might find yourself in a bit of trouble. Arm yourself with knowledge. So perhaps I can see we've got a few experts in the chat box already around social science and what social science says about attachment theory and parenting matters and so on. So if you've, make sure that you link in with those services and get that information. And from a legal perspective, when you're arming yourself with knowledge, start looking at articles, look at blogs from lawyers, look at legal websites, sign up for newsletters. You can always, unsubscribe once you've got the information that you want, but really just arm yourself with knowledge. And with the parenting courses, if anyone there's from RASA or Uniting Care or anyone else who is from one of those services in the webinar who has a really good link to parenting courses that you'd mind sharing, that would be really great. But the point is that these are places that you can go to work out if a parenting course is going to be a good idea for you. And for most of you, it will be. It'll be tailored to you, and there'll be ones that are suitable for you. But if you link in with services such as Relationships Australia and the Family Relationship Centre, they'll be best to help you. There's also a really good course that I recommend for majority of our clients, which is the Circle of Security course. I'm not sure what others think about the Circle of Security course, but I find it's particularly good. It's one that's often ordered by the court, so I recommend clients do it before you get to that point. But if you're self-rep, and even if you're not in court, these are either free or really low-cost courses that can just help you arm yourself with knowledge to get a better understanding of attachment theories, what's best for your children. I'll also get one of the team to drop in the link to the Family Law Project. We've got a YouTube channel, and with the YouTube channel, there's lots of videos there which delve into much more detail around property settlements, parenting matters, and so on. And this one here, thanks, Trini. Trini says, we often get good feedback from parents who have attended the Circle of Security. Yeah, we do too, Trini. And often we find there's a bit of resistance to doing these parenting courses and so on. But also the feedback from parents who do them are that, I actually learnt something and it was quite good. This slide, ironically, I Googled this. Get your legal advice from lawyers. Don't use Google, and don't rely on social media for your legal advice. So I'm linked in with some, social media groups and pages and so on. And there's a lot of really well-meaning people out there who've got their own unique family law separation story. But so much of the information and advice given is inaccurate. It's actually really concerning. So people are well-meaning. However, just be mindful of where you get that information, because that is often inaccurate. Speaking of social media, be careful of what you yourself put on social media. So if your matter's in court, then definitely you should not be posting anything at all about your matter on social media. If you're not in court, then I don't think you should, for a number of reasons, particularly if it's derogatory. If your ex-partner finds that, then it's not going to help in terms of moving forward with your communication at all. I suspect it might undo any communication that you did have. All right, so my next tip for taking back control of your separation, number 5, is to put on your business hat. So think of your separation like a business transaction. Put on your business hat, be civil, be courteous. One of the social workers actually from a pre-mediation session had told my client to treat her ex in a business-like fashion, be formal, direct, and polite. And that goes for whether it's in person or in writing. Really, just treat it like a business transaction. And I think this slide sums it up nicely. I'm a dog person, not a cat person, but I quite like this one. Just an extra tip there, make sure that if you do have a lawyer and you get any legal advice in writing, don't go showing your ex-partner that. Treat everything in a business-like transaction. Next tip to take back control of your separation, which I mentioned earlier, this is just a quote from my book. Understand grief and loss. So understand and appreciate that you're potentially going through one of the most traumatic experiences that you ever will. And, you know, grief is an emotional response to a loss, and you're potentially going through one of the biggest losses that you've ever gone through. You know, loss of family, loss of spouse, loss of your home perhaps, loss of finances, loss of your family home, loss of extended family. And the big one is, which I've put in bold there, the loss of the hopes and dreams and expectations that you had of the future. So you're going through a lot, okay? Don't disregard that. Understand that you are going through a lot there. Most of you will be familiar with the stages of grief, and I'm not going to talk about this at length at all, but I do think it's certainly worthy of a slide or two, and I've got the stages there on the slide. Understand that they're not chronological, they're not linear, and it's really important to understand that you may be experiencing some of these things, but also that your ex-partner may be. So the reason that's important, because if, let's say, for example, you're in the bargaining stage of grief, you're not likely to be thinking clearly. You might be struggling to find meaning, and you're going to do anything possible to either repair the relationship, or you've got your head in the sand. You know, there might be last-ditch efforts. So if you or your ex are in that stage, it's going to be really difficult to perhaps mediate or go through any sort of process at all. And if you or your ex is really feeling a depression in terms of grief, then you're unlikely to be making good decisions at that stage. So that's why it's important to be mindful of that. My next tip for taking back control, and my two staff solicitors there, and in the middle we've got the other director of the firm. I'm not going to like that picture, but I'm sorry guys, but get legal advice. And I told you I'd be mentioning the importance of getting legal advice, but it is really important. It's important to get the advice early. The earlier the better. And don't feel disheartened if you can't afford a lawyer. And that was this second book, Secrets of a Divorce Lawyer, An Insider's Guide for Successfully Navigating Separation and Saving on Legal Fees. We've not launched this book yet, but this is on this topic. The importance of understanding that just because you might not be able to afford a lawyer or don't qualify for legal aid doesn't mean that you shouldn't get legal advice. So there's a lot of things you can do, and I'll just pull up on the slide there. You can link in with a first free meeting with a private lawyer. A few law firms do that. You can, and that might be 20 to 30 minutes where you'll get legal advice specific to your particular circumstances. You can link in with legal aid, and legal aid offices are across Australia. Each state has a different legal aid office, but excuse me, I'll just have a sip of tea. I'm talking too much, sorry. Um, even if you don't qualify for legal aid for ongoing representation, there's likely to be a legal aid office where you can go to and get some preliminary advice, get some procedural information, and really be armed to just get more knowledge that's specific to your particular circumstances. I'll get the office to drop the link to the National Legal Aid Service there. And also, guys, if you can drop the link to the community legal centres. So that's another service which is independent from the legal aid services, but they're a free service where you can go and see a lawyer normally and get some face-to-face advice about your particular matter. I've made a note there, get legal advice again. So get it early, but get it again because your situation is likely to change and it will change throughout. So it'll help you understand what the law says. It'll help you understand the different options available to you to stay out of court. You'll get some procedural information. And the reason I say get legal advice again is because your situation changes. You might have gone off and done mediation. You might have subsequently got some valuations of property so you can better quantify the asset pool. There might have been something concerning that happened in terms of the time arrangements for the children. All sorts of things can happen along the way. So get legal advice early, but get it again at different stages. And if you can't afford a lawyer, make use of those free services. How am I going for time, guys? Yep, pretty good. Alrighty. Learn the other good thing about getting legal advice is that you can learn how to stay out of court. And my view is that should be the end game, because if you're looking at keeping control over your separation and your situation, one of the best things you can do to retain some control is to keep out of court. Once you hit that court system, you'll have a judicial officer, a judge. Sorry, I think I might have just used legalese. you have a judge making a decision for you, so you can lose that control. You're going to keep in better control of your finances if you stay out of court. If you get into the court system and if you instruct a lawyer and you start getting barrister costs and so on involved, then it can become very expensive. You can get the legal advice to learn about things such as community-based mediation, which I know a few of you guys in the chat box today and are offering. Community-based FDR, mediation, which is low cost and free sometimes. There's private mediation, there's legal aid options might be available to you when you thought perhaps they weren't. So legal aid has introduced some, for example, property funding that you might suspect, or you might have thought, oh, I didn't think I'd qualify for that. But if you get that legal advice, you might get that referral for legal aid. And I spoke about all of this stuff in previous webinars in more detail. So just head to our YouTube channel to delve into that. But the point of getting the legal advice and getting it at different stages is to stay out of court, if at all possible. Some matters need to go to court. Choose the way that you want to settle your matter and decide, if mediation or negotiation or other options are best for your particular matter. Now, this next slide is one of my favourites. I feel like I need some background music for this one, like a Pokies or something. It's really important to, when you take control of your separation, understand that nobody is a winner. It's very rare that one of our clients feels like they've had a win, in their matter at all. And how do you quantify it anyway? So I think this leads nicely to my next slide, which is, well, when you're trying to work out what a win is, I don't think anyone's winning, but always go back to your end game and always turn your mind to what is important to you and what are you hoping to achieve overall. I think because a lot of new clients that come to us are really so overwhelmed and stressed and not thinking clearly perhaps, but they come in and they're not able to verbalize what's important to them as an end goal. So is it things, for example, like keeping your children in your majority care, spending a certain amount of time with your kids? Is it important to retain your family home? Is it important to get paid out X number of thousands of dollars so I can set myself up? Is it important to you to keep an amicable relationship with your ex? Is co-parenting important? Some of those things might be important, other things might not be at all. So everybody's different. So just keep in mind your end game, what's important to you, and that will again help you feel more in control. I'd just like to talk about self-care really quickly because it's fundamental. And I haven't spoken at length at all, I don't think, about family violence. And I don't intend to in this webinar. I'm not meaning to minimise that, but I've put a link there on the slides to 1800 Respect. So if you have experienced family violence and you want to speak to someone, that can be a good starting point to get those services in place. And you might find that you're eligible for legal services that you didn't think you would be. So that's really I really recommend that you do that. Mental health care plans is something that we recommend for majority of the new clients that we speak with, because there's not many new clients going through a separation who couldn't do with some assistance and a third party mental health professional to talk to. So if you contact your general practitioner, you can arrange what's called a mental health care plan and get free referrals to services such as psychologists. Men, I've put there as well, for men's support, Dads in Distress. Dads in Distress, we work closely with that organisation. They're really fantastic. And men are overrepresented in suicide rates and deal with their separation differently. They cope differently. And Dads in Distress is a service that really focuses on men sitting alongside men, talking about their stories and listening to other men speaking about their stories. And I'll get the staff to drop that link for Dads in Distress in the comments. I really recommend that. Oh, there you go. Elham, our director, she's on it. Thanks, Elham. And yeah, I strongly recommend that. And I just want to recap. So just take a step back and recap on the things I've spoken about today. A lot of them are really straightforward and they might seem a bit simplistic, but I genuinely believe that if you take one or two of the tips that I've given today, I really do think it will help you have a bit more control over your separation. So just real quick recap. I'll make this slide larger for you. Your matter's unique and different. Every family law matter is different. I've given you some practical tips, and I can see that the slides for this webinar have just dropped into the webinar section there, so you can download them, guys, if you want them. I've spoken about ways to get organised, how to arm yourself with knowledge, the importance of wearing your business hat and understanding grief and loss, getting legal advice again and again, and self-care. I added this slide just because I was feeling a bit silly, and I'm not a cat. I'm a real life lawyer, but get your advice from a lawyer, a real life lawyer, if at all possible. Doesn't take much for me to entertain myself. That's one of the reasons I do this webinar, is for my own entertainment. So if you want a bit of a deep dive into different things that we've spoken about in other webinars, such as parenting matters, children's lawyers, property settlements, head to our YouTube channel. In the meantime, the link for if you want to speak to one of our lawyers nationwide, you can link in for a first free telephone call for half an hour. I really recommend that you do that, and please do. And if you're a service provider, feel free to direct your clients to that as well. That's all I had to speak about today, guys, and I'm about 50 minutes in. So thank you, everybody, for your time. And I'll just check, are there any questions? Adam, are we free to share these slides within our support organisations? Yeah, Adam, please do. I'm glad you found them helpful. Please do share them with whoever you like. There's no copyright there. That's fine. Mike Harris, thanks, Shaya. Great presentation. Cheers. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate your support. Any questions? Look, I know that, interesting, I'm just looking back at the poll, and 38% of you have recently separated. So and we've got 50% service provider, 12% other. Who are you? So a lot of you have recently separated, and I appreciate that you probably don't want to be dropping comments in the chat box or answering questions. So that's fine. Hit us up personally. And we've got people from Victoria, New South Wales, nobody from Queensland, but I'm actually in Brisbane today, so I am. Where do you get your legal advice? Everyone, from a lawyer or legal advisor. Good work. Are you still listening? Yes, you all listened. Oh, that's good. No one was Googling for legal advice. Where did you hear about today's webinar? When did you last update your will and estate documents? 60% never. Well, get in contact, please. 5 years ago, 20% recently. Well done, guys. All right, just in the questions section. Thanks for those of you who are still listening. I can see that most of you are still online. So, Masoom, how the assets are to be divided if you've had a significant portion of assets before a marriage. So Masoom, that's a very specific property question, and that is actually a perfect example of where you need to get really specific, detailed advice and sit down with someone and talk through the background of the relationship, what the assets were that were brought in, what the financial contributions were, and so on. Because if I gave you an answer right now, I'd basically, I mean, that's one of the myths, isn't it, is around everyone's getting a certain percentage of assets. And then we've got Rena, okay, breach of court order and so on. All right, I'll just, yeah. No problem, Masoom. All right, guys, I'll wrap it up now. Thank you for those who joined live. Thanks for everyone who's watching on YouTube or watching back. And we'll see you next time. Bye for now.